Capitol Hill, where yesterday's optimism is crashing into today's reality. Senate Republicans were feeling bullish about their plan to end the 40-day DHS shutdown that's wreaking havoc on airports across the country. But over the last 24 hours, both President Trump and Senate Democrats pushed back. So unless something changes again and fast, these massive TSA lines won't clear up anytime soon. Of course, this political stalemate is a huge inconvenience for travelers, but for TSA agents working without pay, the situation is dire. Here's what the agency's acting administrator told lawmakers this morning.
Many in our workforce have missed bill payments, received eviction notices, had their cars repossessed and utilities shut off, lost their child care, defaulted on loans, damaged their credit line, and drained their retirement savings. Some are sleeping in their cars, selling their blood and plasma, and taking on second jobs repossessed and utilities shut off, lost their child care, defaulted on loans, damaged their credit line, and drained.
And it's not just the TSA. We also heard from top officials at the Coast Guard, FEMA, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. They warned the DHS shutdown poses a risk to America's national security. I'm joined by a terrific group of reporters here at the table. Lauren, 24 hours ago, I was talking to you from here. You were on Capitol Hill talking about the optimism. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was Democrats have yet to return a counteroffer to the Republicans. They rejected this potential deal, arguing that they wanted additional reforms for ICE. And what you're hearing from Republicans is we're not giving additional reforms when you're not completely funding ICE. So they are stuck in this stalemate. And I think if you zoom out, the biggest issue is if you're someone waiting at the airport, if you are a TSA worker, you don't really care about the small minutia that they are trying to trade back and forth. I mean, at some point, this has to come to an end. And I think Democrats are looking at Republicans, viewing this as them in disarray, in part because the president has not come out publicly and said that he would support even the Republican deal that they were putting on the table. And Democrats are saying, look, there's a lot of political pressure on Republicans right now. Maybe we can get a little more.
And there's political pressure on Democrats, obviously, too. I mean, one of the things that we were talking about here yesterday was the fact that if this deal went through, Democrats wouldn't have really gotten much except a lot of attention to the issue, which I guess is not nothing, but on the policy changes that they had been demanding on ICE, that wasn't going to happen.
Right. And if you go back to sort of the start of this shutdown, Democrats were demanding some real restraints on ICE that didn't seem to be on the table here, having to do with ICE agents and whether they needed a warrant or not going into private residences. Also, whether or not they could ban them from wearing masks as well as they go on these sort of sweeping raids that we've seen. The pushback that we've seen recently, I found it to actually be kind of expected because the Republican proposal didn't include even some of the restraints that the White House has signaled they'd be open to. Earlier this month, Tom Homan sent a letter to Congress and noted that they were open to some of these restraints, including having ICE agents publicly identify themselves when on patrol, when going on these raids. That even wasn't in this latest proposal. So I think you're right. There's also pressure on Democrats here. It wasn't too long ago that Americans and many Democrats were watching what was happening in Minneapolis and saying they needed to see changes when it came to the way the administration was using ICE.
And what we talked about this time yesterday, the big question until Democrats kind of pushed for new changes was whether the president was going to agree to this, because he has been wanting what he calls the Save America Act, federal voting changes to be included in this funding bill. Just this morning, the president put this on his social media platform. Blame the Democrats for the airport's mess. They want our country to do badly. They want our country to fail. They broke the already signed bill because they want to take care of criminals who enter our country illegally rather than American citizens. Thank you to our great ICE patriots for helping. It makes a big difference. I may call up the National Guard for more help.
Yeah, I mean, the president has been a looming question mark in all of this. We reported this morning in the Notice newsletter that part of the pitch that was made to him in the Oval Office on Monday afternoon was let's deal with these TSA lines, as we know that there have been significant threat assessments in the country because of the war on Iran, and we'll deal with that Save America Act in reconciliation as much as we can. I talked to a White House official who basically said that argument wasn't what swayed him and that he hadn't been actually swayed. And that's evident from his comments yesterday when he said that I will wait to see the actual bill. I think that Democrats have said that we want to know where the president is before we send over some of this counter argument. I don't think that that's coming, but the president clearly from that True Social understands that this is an issue. He knows just from the last shutdown how detrimental it can be, not just to GDP growth, but to how Americans feel about the Republican Party. I think that that was a huge concern from him last year when they shut down the government in September. And I think you're seeing from that True Social that perhaps is another concern for him now. Now, we haven't seen a lot of polling see which way Americans are breaking, who they are blaming for this shutdown. But as the TSA lines grow and grow and grow, they're going to get angry and perhaps angry at the party in power, which of course is the Republicans.
And today is Wednesday. Congress is supposed to be gone starting probably tomorrow, maybe more likely on Friday, for spring break, for Easter, for Passover. And that is, of course, sort of a built-in potential deadline for Congress. We know that that tends to work in the favor of any deal that is out there. But are you getting a sense from your sources that that's the case this time around?
I think that that was the hope, because traditionally a deadline will focus the mind, especially if it means a 2-week recess and a break from your colleagues, both in your party and across the aisle. Lawmakers are frustrated. Staffers that I'm talking to are saying we got to get them out of here because they are ready to go home, or we may be in a situation where, frustrations just boil over, and it almost gets harder to get a deal the longer you keep frustrated members in a room together. But I will just tell you that there is so much pent up anger at the fact that this is just taking so long. When you think about the fact that there are so many people at the airport who feel like, why isn't this getting dealt with tomorrow, or why isn't this getting dealt with in the next 20 minutes? I mean, they are taking days to get proposals back from one side to another at this point. There's just no urgency.
Well, there is urgency, obviously, there, but you're saying there's no urgency among politicians, but the urgency is very real among the people who are working in a public service and not getting paid. Just some examples. These are some quotes from the Associated Press. This is from Philip Marcello. And what he said is, I never thought I would be in a position where working for the federal government, I would need to go to a food bank to supplement my groceries. And then somebody else, Rebecca Wolf, who was a TSA officer and union leader, said, they don't understand why grandma's crying. I try not to cry in front of them, but sometimes it's just too much.
And plus, you hear the testimony there as well about TSA agents really being forced into some desperate options here, being forced to sell plasma as well to sustain. I mean, DHS has often conducted these internal reports to measure morale of all the agencies in their department, and for years TSA has ranked at the bottom of all of their agencies when it comes to morale. Situations like this are why often when you have shutdowns, they bear the brunt of it. And remember, CBP and ICE, they still have a vast windfall from the bill that was passed last year. TSA doesn't have that, and that's where you're seeing a lot of these problems.
All right, everybody stand by. Up next, an